really, when we thank Hashem, it's an es ratzon, a time of divine favor, in which we can also beseech Hashem, because when we praise and thank Hashem, Hashem is there with us, especially on Chanukah when we light the menorah. Now, why am I doing a talk about playing games, about dreidel during a time of war? There are certainly other things to talk about connected with the beautiful, one of my favorite, maybe my favorite holiday of Chanukah. And the reason why I chose this topic is because there is something very powerful about play. Rebbe Nachman took a trip to Israel during his life. And on the way there, in order to get there, he had to make himself lowly and small in order to go up. This, of course, is a mystical concept that we, in our lowliness, can't necessarily appreciate or understand. And how he did this was he acted silly and he acted foolish. And this was the time during the war with Napoleon, when he was conquering a lot of Europe. And along the way, when he was in Istanbul, Rebbe Nachman began to play games with the children in the streets. And he would take off his coat and run around in his shirt tails. Imagine this great Rebbe, okay? And run around in his shirt tails. And he would play a game of war with the children of Istanbul. And he would say, okay, you're France, and you're Great Britain, and you're Turkey, and you're the king of so-and-so, and you're Napoleon. And then they would play out a war. So what is going on here? Why was he doing this? To just make himself foolish and lowly in order to be able to go up to Israel? So we know from tradition that something very great and mystical was going on with Rebbe Nachman's play. Was he changing or influencing the course of the war, perhaps? Because after all, everything the Rebbe did was for a reason. So if we look at the concept, the Kabbalistic concept, that whatever we do down here affects up there, and of course vice versa, then we understand that play for the Rebbe wasn't just ordinary play. However, he does tell us, regular people, to play, to be foolish, even during difficult times. In fact, especially during difficult times, because simcha is a cure for everything. Simcha can disarm not only our spiritual enemies, but it can even disarm the material enemies that we have, which is why it's so important that as we take time out to grieve and connect with what's going on and to daven, certainly we must pray and beseech Hashem many, many times each day with tons and tons of chapters of Tehillim, many, many Psalms. At the same time, we must not get depressed and be overcome by atzvus, by a bitter, heavy depression, okay? And play is a doorway into simcha, especially for grown-ups, okay? Especially for grown-ups, because we don't play enough. Now, dreidel is a game, but something is going on underneath all that spinning. So let's take a look at what's going on. And we'll not just look at Rebbe Nachman's teachings, we're going to start with some others. So first of all, the Bnei Yissaschar, Rabbi Tzvi Elimelech Shapiro of Dinov, says that the dreidel of Chanukah can be compared to the grogger of Purim. On Purim, when we hold the grogger, we hold it from the bottom and shake it. It's usually on top. It's like a rattle, okay? And we can't see the hand controlling the toy, the grogger. And this reflects the nature of the Purim miracle. Hashem saved us from below, from within nature on Purim, and his hand was concealed. On Chanukah, we spin dreidels from the top. And our hand, symbolizing or representing the hand of Hashem Lahavdil, is clearly visible, just like the open Chanukah miracles of the Maccabees, the defeat of the Greeks, as well as the miracle of one flask of oil being able to light the menorah and burn for 8 days in the Beit HaMikdash, in the Holy Temple. Now, let's get a little history about the dreidel. The Greeks, as we know, occupied Israel, and Israel has been occupied, okay, for close to 2,000 years since that time, including some of the time that the second Beit HaMikdash stood. In 175, before the Common Era, King Antiochus Epiphanes gained control of the Syrian Greek Empire, including present-day Syria and Lebanon and Israel, and generally much of that area. And he laid out some laws. These were his laws. Jews were not allowed to keep Shabbat. They were not allowed to have Jewish holidays. Rosh Chodesh was banned. Many of you know that already. They were commanded to eat non-kosher food, and they were told to worship Greek idols, and they were banned from teaching or learning Torah. Now, we're all Jewish here, so what did we know what the Jews did? They didn't follow those orders. Of course not. We don't follow those kinds of orders. And the source of the dreidel is that the yeshiva students would still study, boys and men. They would still learn Torah, and they would sit and learn Torah, and they had a lookout. And if the Greek soldiers were coming, okay, the lookout would shout out, "Here come the Greeks," and the men and the boys would put away whatever Torah they were learning, okay, whatever books they were learning, and they would whip out from their pockets little tops and coins. And they would sit there spinning tops and playing a gambling game, which a gambling game was very popular among the Greeks. And the Greeks would come in, and they would see them all gambling for money and so on, and being rowdy, and they would say, "Oh, okay, we can relate to this." The great Greeks could relate to this. Now, this trickery allowed a generation of Jews to preserve the Torah, to preserve the Torah learning. And it's interesting because gambling is actually not allowed. We're not allowed to gamble. We are allowed to enter a lottery for charity or a raffle for charity, but in general, we're not allowed to play cards or do gambling games or anything like this, with the lone exception of dreidel on Chanukah. And to this day, at the end of my little talk here, I will give you the instructions on how to play dreidel. Okay, so there's a lot more to the story of dreidel. Let's talk about the letters on the dreidel. I tried to find the biggest dreidel I could. Okay. The letters are Nun, Gimel, Hey, and Shin. And they stand for Nes Gadol Hayasham, a great miracle happened there or occurred there. Some people in Israel replace Sham with Po, a great miracle occurred here. But we're going to stick with this for this talk. The Bnei Yissaschar, again, he's very famous for his commentary on dreidel, noted that the gematria of these letters, and you can figure it out for yourself, added up to 358. The gematria of Mashiach, for those of you who've read my book, Mashiach, Hope for Turbulent Times, you know it's also the gematria for the snake, the serpent. And we have 50, Nun, Gimel, 3, Hey is 5, and Shin, of course, is 300. So we're doing something connected to Mashiach when we play Dreidel. Rav Pinchas of Koritz said Mashiach's light descends to this world on Chanukah. It's a special time for the light of Mashiach. I heard Rav Moshe Meirwife say something very clear about the nature of time, and this connects to this topic. He said the Jews, we view time as the fabric of time, and time is a spiral that repeats itself again and again. And we are always, this is what I loved what he said, we are always reusing time. So the energy present this time is always there to tap into. So this time energy of Chanukah, we need a new Einstein to give us an equation, is the same time energy that went before, yet at the same time, the spiral is always going up and up and up. So it's in a higher plane, okay? So we are still connecting to the original energy, but we're doing it in a fresh way each year. Now, and that obviously is related to this idea of spinning the dreidel. We do it once, we do it twice, we go through time with it, and I'll explain. Now we're going to continue a little bit more with the Bnei Yissaschar until we get to Rebbe Nachman. Okay. He taught that these 4 parts of a human being, these 4 letters correspond with the 4 parts of a human being that the evil kingdoms, the occupiers, the exiles tried to destroy. So the Nun, which stands for Nes Gadol Hayasham, miracle, stands for the Nefesh, the soul. And the Bnei Yissaschar says the Babylonians destroyed the first Beis HaMikdash in Jerusalem, the first holy temple, and that, of course, damaged our nefesh. It damaged our soul. Next, he says, we go to Shin, Sham, okay, there, and it stands for Sechel, the intellect. And this, of course, is pretty obvious. The ancient Greeks offered so many competing philosophies and ideas to Judaism, attempting to turn traditional Jews into Hellenized Jews, okay? People who worship Greek gods and understood the world using Greek philosophy. Okay, then we go to Gimel. Okay, it wasn't presented in the regular order. And Gimel is Gadol, for great, but it also stands for Guf, body. And the Persian Empire tried to seduce the Jews. How? With physical luxuries. Gold plates at the feast, fancy foods, fabulous wines, beautiful tapestries, fragrance, dancing women, and so on. So what we have here is 3 exiles that affected us body, mind, and soul. The ancient Romans finally, okay, were Chaya, which was the word for was or occurred. And that represents Hakol, everything, because he says the ancient Romans attacked the Jews using all 3 means. They assaulted us body, mind, and soul. Okay. And if you read your history, you will be able to glean from the history, from the actual history, the B'nai Yissachar's insights. And I thought that was really worth sharing, something to think about. Okay. Now, Rebbe Nachman's approach to the Dreidel is they don't just stand for something, the letters, okay? The letters themselves, okay, get ready to listen to this explosive idea. The letters themselves are aspects of change in this spiral of time that we've talked about, okay? So what do I mean by these aspects of change? So let's talk about the letters again from Rebbe Nachman's point of view, okay? And we can tie the two together later, the B'nai Yissachar and Rebbe Nachman. So the Nun, the Nes, the miracle, stands for Nivdal. What is Nivdal? It is the transcendental. This is the everlasting, the eternal, the above and beyond everything. And this relates obviously to the idea of a miracle, because a nes happens outside of nature. Supposedly, the truth is why do we see nisim? Why do we see miracles? To spark us to look for the miracles that are occurring constantly that are cloaked in nature. So Nivdal is transcendental, okay? And it transcends the laws and boundaries of creation. Okay. The Gimel, Gadol, great, stands for Galgal. What is Galgal? Galgal is the rotation of the stars and galaxies. It's the celestial realm. And it relates to the idea of greatness, obviously, because we look up at the sky at night especially, and we are awed. We are awed. If anybody's ever been to an observatory and has been able to look through a major telescope, it's even more amazing to see the greatness of all the stars and planets and galaxies that Hashem created. And it's interesting because the celestial, even though in our intellect we think of it as physical, we think of stars and planets as physical, we are told by Rebbe Nachman that the celestial is separate from the physical. Next, we are going to go to a concept that we're going to have to focus on. Use your thinking caps, okay? Hey, Chaya, which means was or occurred or happened, stands for the hyle, the hyle. And the hyle in English, as Aristotle called it, is the hyle, Hyle. You can Google it at some point. And the hyle is between the above and the below and the before and the after. The hyle is expressed before creation. The Rebbe says, in fact, this is the root of the creation. All dimensions come from this root. This step before, it's an interface between, and this is an important concept, the potential and the actual, okay? There has to be a bridge, or as I like to refer to it, as an interface between them. And this refers to the idea of time, because time itself isn't so graspable. Time is both a creation and it's also something that preceded the actual expression of creation. So the letters on the dreidel connect us to creation and even pre-creation. Ramban says that Hashem first created he calls it the chomer hyle, the matter or material of hyle, and that everything came from it. So what is this potential for creation? What is this interface between the spiritual and the physical? So Rashi says that everything, despite what Bereshit says, actually was created the first day in potential, and that each day, everything through the hyle became material as we read it when we read Genesis. Okay. So what is hyle? It's some kind of element, some kind of elemental function, process. And we know when we get down to the atomic level, we all have a basic understanding of this. We know that matter and energy are really one and the same. Matter is an expression of energy, and these are all an expression of a factor of time. And we won't go too far into that because it's complicated, and I want to have plenty of time for everybody to talk and everything today. So it's interesting because Rebbe Nachman calls this the root of everything, but perhaps there is something going on here that isn't so explicit in Rebbe Nachman's teaching, which, by the way, you can find in Sichas Haran, Rebbe Nachman's wisdom. So the Mishnah states that anyone who looks into four things is better off having not been created. What are these four things? What is above? What is below? What is before? And what is after? We're not supposed to delve into it. But like I said, there's a trick here. Because the Rebbe is referring to these four things in his description. But the trick is like this. The dreidel, we're not delving. We're not being intellectual. We're not even davening. We're playing. So I mentioned in the beginning, play is very important. And we are merely playing with the dreidel. What are we accomplishing in our simplicity, not being great tzaddikim like Rebbe Nachman or the other great tzaddikim? What are we accomplishing? Accomplishing something. Okay. So important to play dreidel at least once this Chanukah. All right. Next, we're going to go to the last letter, Shin, which stands for Sham, there. And Sham stands for a place, okay, a material place. And the Rebbe says that realm is Shafal, the lowest realm, the material realm, the physical material world. So heavy, so weighted down by gravity, so weighted down by the pull of our needs and our desires, okay? And yet, this is what really struck me after really reading this over and over again. The Nivdal, remember the Nivdal, the Nun, the transcendental, the miracle, the Nes? Where does that take place, that Nes? Right here, in the lowliest realm. We are seeing, and please Hashem, we should continue to see that since really Erev Chanukah, we see that the Hamas has been surrendering at quite a rate. And when you think about their fierce and animalistic, beyond, but lower than animals, their nature, and here they are surrendering in their underwear, okay? To me, this looks like a miracle. And I hope we see plenty more of these kinds of miracles, as much as we say is necessary. Now, I would like to take a moment to read from Sichos Haran, Rebbe Nachman's wisdom in English, okay? Because it's important to the game of dreidel. And for those of you who are interested, this is section 40. No, the world is a rotating wheel. It is like a dreidel, where everything goes in cycles. Man becomes angel, and angel becomes man. Head becomes foot, and foot becomes head. Everything goes in cycles, revolving and alternating. All things interchange, and one from the other, and one to another, elevating the low and lowering the high. This is because all things have one root, as we discussed. There are transcendental beings such as angels, which have no connection with the material. There is the celestial world, which has some connection to materiality. Finally, there is the lower world, which is completely material. And all of these come from different realms, but they all have one root, okay? That's the hyle that we were speaking about, that interface. At one time, something can be on top, a head, with another on the bottom, a foot. Then the situation is reversed. Head becomes foot, and foot becomes head. A man becomes an angel, and an angel becomes man. And I'm going to skip a little bit. For the world is like a rotating wheel. It spins like a dreidel with all things emanating from one root. We find the foot of one is also higher than the head of another. In the spiritual worlds, the lowest level of an upper world is higher than the highest level of a lower one. Still, everything revolves in cycles. We can say that these cycles, that the hyle is the root of the process of transformation, the act of this constant rotation and transformation. We think just about our own lives. Sometimes we can compare them to a roller coaster, but it's probably more apt to compare them to that circle, that cycle, that spiral that goes up and up. Sometimes we're down, lower, sometimes we're up, higher. Now, the Rebbe tells us this is why we play with a dreidel on Chanukah, because Chanukah is the concept. He always has these bechinas, these concepts, these aspects of the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple. And the primary concept of the temple is a revolving wheel, a cycle. Because the temple, as it says in the Talmud, represents the superior below and the inferior above, okay? The form of the Beit HaMikdash was engraved on high. This corresponds to the inferior above. The temple is therefore like a dreidel, a rotating wheel, where everything revolves and is transformed. The temple refutes logic. Why does it refute logic? It refutes logic because a man can go to the temple and pray or make a sacrifice, and it goes up to the transcendental realms, and it goes up even higher to Hashem, and Hashem accepts it. Hashem, who is encompassing everything and filling everything, but above everything. And then the temple, Hashem comes down. The Shekhinah comes down into the shafal, that very physical realm. And of course, Chanukah, what was Chanukah? Chanukah was the Chanukah, Sabayis, the dedication of the house of Hashem. And that's what occurred. It was a rededication. Okay. That's why the oil burned. Okay. The new altar, the altar was refreshed. It was rebuilt. Yehuda Maccabee rebuilt it. Okay. So truly every realm is a different expression of the same oneness, which is Hashem. And we see our own lives spin and rotate, okay, as I said. And we also see the Jewish nation, the Jewish people, Am Yisrael, also going up and down, but always spiraling higher. I want to say that I noticed that this attack in the past, Jews were very fractured, even during World War II. There was a lot of, Jews did not always come together, but here we saw most Jews come together with such unity. So we could see that the spiral's going up. We are going higher and higher. Yes, we might be lowly, but also we are the generation that's going to be able to accept what's high. Now, what's the main thing to remember, perhaps? Every day, we have to remember that change is the only constant. Okay, the spinning, rotating wheel, like the spinning, rotating dreidel, like the spiral. It's always changing, yet it's always going back to those certain energies in those certain times that I spoke about at the beginning. On Chanukah, we play this dreidel, this game, and if we believe we are somehow spinning and rotating out an expression of these deep ideas. I like to play dreidel. We'd usually do it once on Hanukkah. If you can do it more, it's even better. I like to do it just because it's play and it's silly and it's fun, but really, we don't really know what's going on. It's the only time where a specific game is recommended for a holiday. On Purim, we play also. But of course, on Purim, we're dressing up, we're having parties, there are rhymes, there are songs, there's dance, but it's not a specific game. Dreidel's not only a specific game, but it's gambling, okay? Which is, of course, forbidden, yet on Hanukkah, we're allowed to do it. All right. Just don't bet millions, guys. Pennies, chocolate, something like that. It's good. Okay. So Hanukkah, the Beit HaMikdash was rededicated. Okay, and this gives us the idea that we can always rededicate ourselves. We can start anew. All right. We, as we change, are always tapping into the old and new at the same time. The Beit HaMikdash was like a technology we haven't experienced before or since, because it was able to connect all worlds and bridge all gaps. And God willing, we will be able to experience this amazing ultimate expression of Hashem's love for us, his expression of the ultimate purpose of creation and its root, and to create Mashiach Tzidkenu together, to go up to Yerushalayim, to the holy Beit HaMikdash, speedily in our time.